Welcome to our episode of Reach Minds, Thoughts for Your Life's Journey podcast. In this podcast, we will be exploring the subject of imposter syndrome. Why and when does it occur? And what could we do about recognizing imposter syndrome and, more importantly, managing it? Now, imposter syndrome, in many ways in the last few years, has become the buzzword within organizations and individuals expressing it knowingly, as if it's a shared understanding of what we mean by this. Today, I'm joined by Coreene Archer, who is a principal consultant and an executive coach at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. Coreene also teaches on multiple courses, including advanced coaching skills and supervision skills for coaches and consultants. Welcome, Coreene.
Thank you.
Now, I'm really looking forward to our conversation together because, as I said at the introduction, this has been a subject that's been hovering around for so long that I really would like to get to the nitty-gritty of it in many ways. I know it's used in quite a few leadership trainings as well. And as I said, a lot of women express it as if it's, I've got imposter syndrome. So how would you define imposter syndrome?
Perhaps the best place to start is with a bit of a dictionary definition. And the primary understanding of what imposter syndrome is that it relates to the feelings of being a fraud. But a definition that I think it works, that comes from Oxford, it's the persistent inability to believe that one's own success is deserved or it has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts and skills. So that tells you in quite succinctly what it is. It's about feeling as though you belong and you feel legitimate and that you have a right to be there.
So when we don't have a feeling of belonging and a legitimate right to have a sense of belonging, does that mean our imposter syndrome gets evoked?
Over the years, my research has shown that imposter syndrome shows up because people don't fit. This is my hypothesis. It's less that they aren't good enough to do the job, which is the underlying feeling, and more that they don't feel as though they fit. They're not good enough to be in the space they're in. And coming from a background where we work at the Tavistock Institute with system psychodynamics, we understand that what's beneath the surface shows up above the surface. And in terms of systemic thinking and behaviour, that these things are all connected throughout an organisation. Lots of people, if they feel that they are not quite the right type in a certain space, then that feeling of being an imposter and not belonging can surface quite quickly.
So I know that we've had a few discussions around imposter syndrome. What made you get interested in imposter syndrome as a concept?
My work with issues around race and difference, I'm particularly interested in difference and how that shows up in organisational life. And I noticed when I was working in organisations, and particularly when I was coaching leaders, that imposter syndrome was expressed by particular groups. And the main group that seemed to express feelings about imposter syndrome was white women. And I started to be quite curious about how this syndrome was just being used wholesale all the time by these women. Oh, I feel I've got imposter syndrome. So that made me a bit suspicious. And what I also noticed was that Black women didn't say that very often. It wasn't really something that I heard ethnic minority women say. And I thought about that, and I think when you understand there is a truth about working in corporate life and professional circles, where often for the ethnic minority person, by the time they've got to a significant place in the hierarchy, they've worked so hard to get there. There's no reason for them to feel like they don't deserve to be there. They haven't worked hard enough to be there. They have. So the feeling of not belonging comes from something else. And that was what started me really investigating what else might be going on.
So what else is going on if women and men from ethnic minority background are got to the top of their game? What is it that they might be experiencing, as you say, below the surface and above the surface?
I think there's a recognition that in organizations and in corporate life that there is a hierarchy at which, more often than not, white men sit at the top. And they are the ones who determine who fits and who belongs. And whether it's a conscious or unconscious thought, it permeates the whole system. And that sense of not belonging, I think, is felt by people who aren't exactly the same as the man at the top of the system, that white man at the top of the system. And as I continue doing my research and my investigations and having various conversations through organisations and in coaching, people would volunteer their experience around their sense of being an imposter. And whenever they said, "Oh, I think I have imposter syndrome," or "I feel like an imposter," my ears would prick up, thinking, "Oh, what are they going to say?" And what I found was, for women, when I probed beneath the kind of their presentation of imposter syndrome, generally there was a gender issue, but they were feeling that there was something connected to being a female, being a woman in the space that had triggered that sense of imposter syndrome. And then when I encountered a lot of white men who came from the working class, so perhaps their language wasn't as sophisticated or their accent wasn't as polished, they also felt a sense of imposter syndrome. And I think that was then when I did some probing, it seemed to be related to class. And so I think that the manifestation of imposter syndrome is based in a sense of not belonging in a system where you don't look like the person at the top.
One of the things I'm curious about, Coreene, how does that show up in terms of white women and maybe the global majority Black and ethnic minority women? How does that show up differently in regards to that?
I think with white women, when you start to help them explore whether there might be something going on and offer the idea that maybe this is a mislabeled dynamic and explore what's going on in the organization, very quickly they can make the connection. And I think if I was really far off, it wouldn't feel as though it would resonate. It wouldn't feel true. But the more I say it, the more it's confirmed. And similarly with Black women, when they say it, I explore what's going on, and when I again say that I think it's a mislabeled dynamic, and perhaps what you're experiencing might be coming from a different angle, and then we talk about issues of race and racism in the organisation, then again, quite quickly it starts to resonate. So I think my baseline has been that white men who don't feel they fit, because of course you have all the markers of success, but if you feel you have to hide some aspect of your identity, something about you doesn't fit in that space, then it's a clear signal that something else is going on.
So I think what you're saying is that perhaps it's imposter syndrome, although it connects with the individual themselves, there is a whole systemic dynamic that occurs within the system that people operate in. And it may be that a person works really hard and they get to that place and they're confident in their ability to do the role. However, the loop back that the system gives you
Mhm.
about fit and a sense of belonging isn't
Yeah,
there.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. And I think that if we think about unconscious processes and the roots of psychoanalysis and how that might show up and support our understanding of what's happening in this space, often we pick up these projections. Somebody else's feelings can be picked up by an individual if they have a leaning towards feeling certain ways. So if you're someone who easily feels like you don't belong, then you'll feel imposter syndrome very quickly in a system if it's present.
But that's quite interesting. In addition to not having a sense of belonging and a fit, which may be in the environment of an organization unconsciously,
Yes.
what else might trigger somebody to start experiencing imposter syndrome, do you think?
I think if they are drawing on old or past experiences where perhaps something hasn't gone well, then their sense of the possibility of failing is heightened. And so again, they have a particular valency and attraction to certain emotions in the sentient part of the system, the part of the system that feels. We forget that organizations are not just about the task and the practical focus of the work, but actually there's a whole layer of feelings that go alongside it. How people feel about the jobs they've been asked to do, how they feel about the person that's sitting next to them, how they feel about who's been promoted last week, and all of that is colouring the system as well.
So, in a sense, if I'm predisposed to being perhaps aware of my past failings, and if I haven't worked those through, that could trigger for me in terms of my sense of not belonging in this organization and not fitting
Absolutely.
in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Sounds very interesting, that part of it. And I guess one of my awareness around the subject of imposter syndrome itself, that actually the term itself grew from two white women,
Yes.
I think in the
Yeah,
50s or the 60s, who
that's
coined
right.
that
That's
phrase.
right. That's right. That's right. But some of their work has been a bit, I wouldn't say discredited, but dismissed is probably a bit more accurate because of the way that the kind of research that they did and the way that they did their analysis. And they often, I think, it was linked very much to the individual and less linked to the organization. And as I say, my hypothesis is that actually it's a mislabeled dynamic of organizational life.
Yeah. I probably agree with you that it is about the organizational life, the dynamics that are in the water that reside perhaps at many unconscious level.
Yeah.
And what you were saying earlier on, that some of it's relational as well, which we unconsciously pick up things, and that can also trigger things for us in terms
Yes.
of our sense of belonging or fitting in
Yes.
into that organization. So, what part do you think culture and society might play in having imposter syndrome, if any?
I think there are all these unspoken rules that are encoded through different aspects of society. And an example of it might be the old boys network. And so if there's a space that's created to exclude, then you go in with genuinely trying to be part of an organization and trying to be part of a group and belong, and then you feel as though you don't. That's entrenched, an entrenched behavior that is triggering that. And I think it shows up so much in all these hidden codes in organizational life. But the biggest problem is, I think, and why I work quite hard to disrupt notions of imposter syndrome is it becomes a limiting factor, and people feel that because they feel that they are an imposter, they're not good enough, they don't fit, what they feel able to do, how they feel able to challenge what's possible for them, then becomes reduced. And so I think it's really important to recognize that actually your accent shouldn't be a determining factor of where you get to in your career. And I've done a lot of work with people around helping them let go of that worry that actually the way that they speak or the fact that they're female is something that should be, could be, or should be a limiting factor.
Absolutely. And I guess the second part of our podcast is about managing it. So if an individual is thinking about themselves around uh, imposter syndrome and recognizing it, what could they or what actions could they take to counter that within themselves?
I would say the first thing is to test. Does this is could this be true? Do I really not belong here? Have I not worked? Have I sidestepped all the processes to get into this organization? Which, if you have, then of course you feel less stable in that environment. But if you haven't, then okay, I have a right to be here. And then if it's something that should enable you to keep moving forward. But if you feel that you're really stuck, then either talk to a colleague or talk to a professional, and we can help you work out where the root of this has come from and how to let it go.
Hmm. And can you give an example, maybe without disclosing the work that you've done with individuals where they have let go of it? And you gave example of accents. Don't let your accents be the impediment
Mm-hmm.
to you progressing
Mm-hmm.
within an organization. What other examples could you share that it might enlighten people saying, okay, maybe I need to do something about that?
It's been when I've spoken and to people. So when I worked with some Black women around issues of imposter syndrome, and then we explored their journey, and we explored when they felt the feeling and where it was coming from. And there is a process of unhooking that can happen once you recognize that the reason you're feeling a certain way or where that behavior comes from, then you have a choice. Oh, this is how I'm being made to feel. And groups and organizations are very good at passing very uncomfortable feelings on to people who are there ready to accept them or used to accepting them and thinking, oh, this must be me. Once you disrupt that, then you're able to sidestep and do something else, make a different choice, not be silent in a meeting and speak up, or go for the job that you want because you know that actually I have all the qualifications. And generally, as I think it's a known fact that women tend to have more qualifications for the jobs that they go for. And so they are definitely often overqualified for the roles that they're going for rather than underqualified.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So again, there's no the fact doesn't support the feeling, but the way we get so conditioned into thinking a certain way about ourselves and where we belong and how we fit in certain organizations that it's very hard to shake it.
So what that kind of finally leads me to is something that's been mulling in my mind, that there are often many courses that are around targeted at women, female leaders, around confidence building or being assertive. What's your thoughts around that? Is that a way of countering our own imposter syndrome?
Yes, I think that confidence building, any work that you do to improve yourself and strengthen your resilience is always helpful. But I think it's rooted in understanding that in organizations, the further up you go, the less people are willing to share power. And if they don't want you for you to have some, I have to give up some of mine. I don't want that. So this is where how all these their defenses are mobilized. And so you get caught in it, you get pulled in.
So interesting. If you get caught up in the defenses in the organization,
Mm.
how can someone like myself break through that then?
I would suggest it's all about knowing what belongs to you and what doesn't. And if you know yourself, and if you know you're equipped, and if you know that you've done the work and you have the experience and you know that, and you can stay in the space of knowing who you are and what you're bringing to the table, that should be enough to help you just feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yes. I love that phrase, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Absolutely.
I think that is really important, knowing oneself. And the other thing that I think you said, which I feel is really powerful, is be a disruptor and
Yes.
recognize what belongs with you and what doesn't belong with you. And
Yes.
almost differentiate between the two, as opposed to taking on things which are within the system, which got nothing to do with you at all.
Exactly. There is often the projected feelings are feelings that are not wanted by someone else. And so if I don't want to, if I feel threatened by you, then I'm going to project all my fears and anxieties onto you so that you have to carry them and I don't. And that those can be the things that become the things that limit you.
Absolutely. And which then turn into your sense of not belonging and fitting in.
Exactly.
Great. Coreene, this has been a fascinating, and I particularly like knowing ourselves is an important element around breaking through our own imposter syndrome if we experience it, because we don't all have to experience that.
No.
And recognize, I think more importantly, what you're saying is that it's about the dynamics that exist within an organization. There's a systemic element of it that not everything gets reduced to us.
That's right.
But it's the system that we operate in that we need to be savvy around and what's going on.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you very much. That's been fascinating.
You're welcome.
If you enjoy listening, tell a friend.